Hello, my name is Rob Good, and welcome to Shit, I Have to Teach in 20 Minutes, a podcast for history teachers and anyone who wants a quick dose of history. Thanks for joining us today. We want to give a quick shout out to Emily Hahn, the daughter of my illustrious co-host, who composed the song you hear every episode before we discuss our lesson plan. So thank you, Emily. In every episode, my colleague Eric Hahn and I interview an historian about their scholarship. We ask them to identify the most important concepts they think teachers should share with their students about the topic. We also include free lesson plans that can be downloaded from the episode notes linked to this podcast. Eric, what is our focus for today?
Well, Rob, today's topic is colonial Latin American history. Thankfully, this is a topic that is rich with content, but the breadth of the subject can be overwhelming for teachers and students at times. We hope this episode will provide you with some clarity about today's theme, even if you're one of the many listeners who simply enjoys learning about current historical research.
Excellent. And so who is the historian who's joining us today?
Today, we're excited to have Dr. Silvia Escanilla Huerta join us. By a stroke of luck, I met Silvia at the American History Association conference in Chicago recently. After a brief discussion, I was certain that she would be an outstanding guest on our humble podcast. Dr. Escanilla Huerta is a professor at University of Maryland, Baltimore County, and a scholar of Latin America who was born and raised in Argentina. She specializes in the processes of independence in Peru and Bolivia, focusing on indigenous peoples and political history. She has published several book chapters and articles in journals such as American Hispanic Historical Review and Revista de Indias. At UMBC, Dr. Escanilla Huerta teaches a course on colonial Latin American history.
I am so excited to learn so much more about this topic. So welcome, Silvia. We are so happy to have you here today. What would you say are the most important ideas about colonial Latin American history that teachers should teach and students should know?
Well, thank you for having me. And I think the three most important ideas are that teachers should teach pre-Hispanic history, actually, that teachers should teach indigenous peoples as savvy legal actors, and that teachers should teach the independence of Latin America not as only Creole or Spanish European kind of center event, but an event that involved ordinary people such as indigenous and Black people. Those are the three main ideas that I want to share with teachers.
So you started with pre-Hispanic history, right? I am very curious how you would suggest folding that into learning about colonial Latin American history.
So for me, learning about colonial America or understanding colonial Latin America without a solid grounding in pre-Hispanic history is like trying to read the second half of a book without knowing the first half.
That's right.
It is impossible to understand the colonial period if you started as a blank state in 1492, because it unfolded within very complex indigenous worlds that had political systems, economies, belief structures, and social hierarchies that were very complex and that profoundly shaped colonial societies. Civilizations like the Aztec, of the Maya, and the Inca were not primitive societies. They were sophisticated polities with established systems of tribute, governance, labor organization, even long-distance trade. And when the Spanish arrived, they basically co-opted these existing structures rather than replacing them entirely. So you cannot understand how, so quickly Spanish colonizers organized this society without understanding how the society was organized in the first place before they arrived. And also, even if you think about social and ethnic categories, those pre-Hispanic social and ethnic categories laid the groundwork for colonial hierarchies. Indigenous identities, alliances, and rivalries that existed before the arrival of the Spaniards, those shaped actually the process of conquest itself. You cannot understand the fall of the Mexica capital of Tenochtitlan, without considering all the indigenous allies that sought, advantage against the imperial domination that the Mexica were exerting over them. So the understanding and knowledge of pre-Hispanic political rivalries is what helps students to understand why colonial rule took the form that it took in Mexico, in Peru, and other parts of Spanish America, because some communities negotiated privileges, others faced harsher subjugation. And so the different shape that the colonial societies took in different parts and regions of Spanish America depend on how this interaction with the different polities in Spanish America and the colonizers, how it took shape. And even if you think about religion, I mean, you cannot understand, the missionary efforts to Christianize indigenous populations. That didn't happen in a cultural vacuum. These missionaries interacted with rich spiritual traditions, with sacred geographies, calendars, and the resulting religious landscape of colonial Latin America, the way that even looks today, was shaped by this syncretism, by this adaptation and this resistance that the European religions encounter when they came in contact with indigenous understandings of cosmology and religiosity.
It's so exciting to think about all the different ways that indigenous societies brought different aspects of culture to bear, because so often this story is told as sort of conquistadors, and so the agency of indigenous people and the cultural systems aren't discussed much. I'm really intrigued by what you said about savvy legal actors. Is there an example that would be good for a high school teacher to latch onto as an example? You just sort of talked a little bit about the alliance structure in Mexico, but are there other examples, or an example that you could give out of, for instance, Peru and Bolivia, that would help teachers sort of show that savvy legal approach?
Well, the best example that I can think of right now is the example of the Peruvian intellectual Huamampoma de Ayala. He's the perfect example of an indigenous person who really showed expertise not only in indigenous ways of living, but also in the colonial work structure and how it worked. I think that one of the things that teachers should emphasize when they teach colonial Latin America is that indigenous peoples were not just passive subjects of empire, but they were also very skilled legal actors who learn to navigate, they learn to appropriate, and at times reshape even colonial law. And so emphasizing indigenous legal expertise, such as Huamampoma's legal expertise, reveals a colonial world that was structured not solely by domination, but also by negotiation, litigation, and strategic adaptation. And very quickly on, indigenous peoples latched on the legal frameworks that were deployed in Spanish America. And this is because they already had rich legal cultures that were pre-Hispanic, long-standing traditions of tribute records, the land titles, formal dispute resolution procedures that existed before the Spanish invasion. And so they adapted to the new laws and legal frameworks that the colonizers brought, and they used their legal expertise, oftentimes in a collective way. They used town councils as a way to, they became crucial institutions for managing relations with colonial authorities, and community leaders pooled resources to hire lawyers, translators. They travel long distances to present cases before regional courts. They petition to the king. And those actions require not just knowledge of legal norms, but also political strategy, financial coordination, and even rhetorical skill. And in many cases, communities successfully defended communal lands against encroachment. They resisted tribute demands, and they secured recognition from local authorities. So for me, highlighting indigenous legal agency helps to complicate very simplistic narratives of total dispossession, which are the classic narratives. And I'm not denying that colonialism resulted in massive demographic collapse and land loss and exploitation, because that is certainly the case. But it definitely did not eliminate indigenous political life. And actually, it is very clear throughout the colonial period that this persistent engagement with the courts, that was the way that many communities preserve communal land holdings for generations, even today. And many secure exemptions. They negotiated tribute levels of payment. They remove abusive or corrupted officials. And while the gains were many times partial, they were fragile, they were still real. And they show that colonial rule functions through a dynamic interplay of coercion and consent, imposition, but also negotiation.
Well, it's amazing. And I hope that we all get the message that to include indigenous systems, the systematic approach. And you're right. I think even today, labor movements employ much of the type of resistance that you're alluding to. Want to give you the opportunity. We have a couple, 3-4 minutes left to talk a little bit about your third point. Indigenous peoples involved in independence movements. If you could talk about that for a little bit, that would be amazing.
Yeah, that's my area of research, actually.
Okay.
The wars of independence in Latin America are often portrayed as elite political movements led by Creole men. Creole meaning people of European descent that were seeking autonomy from Iberian rule, and they were inspired by the Enlightenment, by the American Revolution, by the French Revolution. So there is this sense that the wars of independence in Latin America happened afterwards. They were like an afterthought, a kind of a consequence, a bit of part of a diffusionist movement, of spread of ideas that came from Western Europe and the US, and it kind of slowly trickled down to the rest of the world, and Latin America would be part of this later kind of stage of the age of revolutions. And I think that without denying that Creole leadership was obviously very important, I'm not minimizing the figures of Simón Bolívar or Miguel Hidalgo, José de San Martín, but what I'm saying is that this interpretation oftentimes obscures the broader social reality, which is that it wasn't simply an elite affair. Men and women from indigenous and African descent, mixed race, poor urban and rural communities, they all actively participated in the conflict. And they often saw the conflict as an opportunity to renegotiate social hierarchies and secure material benefits and claim rights that had long been denied under colonial rule. And so not only the armies depended heavily on non-elite recruits, basically it was just at the leadership level that people were Creole. The rest, even the lower rank officials, were all peasants, artisans, laborers, formerly slave people, indigenous villagers. All these individuals were not just coerced bodies filling the ranks. They joined because independence movement promised tangible changes, an end to tribute, relief from forced labor, access to land, racial equality, or freedom from slavery even. And I think that is something worth remembering when we describe these wars of independence. And one last thing I want to make, one point, is that women's participation in the wars of independence in Latin America is crucial too. And it really challenges the notion of independence as a purely male elite project. Women served as messengers, spies, fundraisers, nurses, camp followers, and they also took arms. They maintained supply networks, they gathered intelligence, they sustained households disrupted by war, and not only played, a logistical role, but they also framed their participation in political terms. And the name that comes to mind is the name of Juana Azurduy, who was a militia commander. She commanded a militia of 6,000 men in Bolivia, in what nowadays is Bolivia. And she gained recognition for her efforts as an exemplary military commander. So the involvement of women demonstrates that independence movements really mobilize entire communities, not just male political elites.
You read my mind, because I was going to ask you for a name or a story or a document that teachers could use to latch on to that story and to complicate that narrative. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah, and also thank you for actually clarifying what is now clear to me, a very complex topic in independence movements in Latin America. So we appreciate your I know I could talk to you for at least another hour, and perhaps you'll come back and expand upon some of these ideas. That would be lovely. Thank you very much, Silvia, for being our guest today in the Colonial Latin America. It's talking about it and helping our teachers and anybody else who's interested in listening to this history. You are amazing, Rob.
Well, yeah, and to bring this new research, or research that's been out there that teachers may not know of. So we deeply appreciate you doing that. Thank you so much. And for our listeners, remember that you can download the free lessons from the link that is provided in the episode notes. So be sure to stay tuned after this brief song to hear that description of those lessons. So
and we'll also link some of the references that Dr. Escanilla Huerta talked about today too. So that'll be available to you for convenience.
Thank you so much.
Oh no, the clock is ticking, 20 minutes, time is spinning, falling facts from thin air, hope they think I came prepared.
That was an amazing encapsulation of colonial Latin American history from Dr. Escanilla Huerta. Certainly much to think about. So for my lesson, I wanted to highlight Silvia's emphasis on what was originated or borrowed or co-opted by Spanish conquistadors in colonial Latin America. I created a list of 16 different terms from that time period, and students will place those terms on either the indigenous people's side of a chart or on Spanish conquistadors' side. Links to definitions are provided in the lesson. Then students are asked to write a paragraph based upon a piece of art and their understanding of what belongs on conquistador side and what belongs on indigenous people's side. A piece of art showing a guinea pig at the center of the table of the Last Supper. Students will hopefully wonder why a guinea pig is placed on the table when those animals were not native to where Jesus lived. And hopefully the notion of syncretism will become clear as well. Rob, what do you have for our lesson in this podcast today?
Today? Well,
Yes.
syncretisms, that's a fancy word. But what a great lesson that is. And students are going to love this art with a guinea pig at the center of the Last Supper. I think it's really going to make them think deeply. I also was inspired by Silvia's observation that most of the narratives about colonial Latin America ignore the role of indigenous people, people of African descent, and women. This is particularly true in stories about Latin American wars for independence. My lesson positions the student as an editor at the OER World History Project, tasked with revising their materials. While OER is a wonderful online resource used by many teachers, their readings on Latin American wars for independence tend to reinforce the traditional narrative that Silvia critiqued, where Creole leaders are inspired by Enlightenment ideas and they are the driving force behind these movements. Students will read both the OER account and an article about Juana Arzudi de Padilla, a woman with indigenous heritage who was also a military leader in the Bolivian independence movement. The assessment will require them to write a memo suggesting revisions to the narrative in the OER World History Project's collection.
Excellent, excellent. Teachers and students, if you're listening, have fun with that. Thank you for listening. And remember, you can download the free lessons from the link provided in the episode notes. Write a review, please. We love feedback.
Love it, love it, love it.
John, love it.